Hi guys, and welcome back. Today I am finally doing my hair tutorial, which I've been wanting to do for a very long time. A little bit about this though, this is going to be a little bit of a basics on how I do hair and the things that I think about when I'm doing it. I would love to do a few iterations of hair tutorials where I can focus on drawing just a specific hairstyle. So if you guys have any suggestions or questions on specific types of hair or hairstyles or anything like that that you'd like to see on its own tutorial, please let me know. And also if you have any questions on what I say today, let me know. I'd love to be a little bit more clear if I can. But as far as the tutorial format goes, we are going to start looking at some of my relatively recent pieces so I can analyze some of the things that I'm looking for and the ways that I draw first. And then we're going to get into a section where I will draw hair live with you guys and talk through how I do that and what I'm thinking about and show a little bit of exactly what I'm talking about at the beginning in a real example. But we can go ahead and get started just analyzing this and dissecting what I do when I'm drawing hair. Okay, so we can go ahead and just drop the opacity down on this one so I can do a little bit of a red line on top. There are a few things that I make sure that I'm paying attention to when I am drawing hair. The first one is one that you'll hear a lot, but it's volume. Hair has volume and it has thickness to it, and that's something that I need to pay attention to around the scalp for the way that it lifts up off of the head, as well as in the locks themselves and the way that they intertwine with themselves. So one very important thing to remember with hair is you need to make sure that the amount of hair makes sense. I'll explain that a little bit. So right here is actually a good example of something I could do better. I have this hair coming down right there, and then it shows it wrapping around almost like it's twisting on itself and coming down, and I have this extra little hair there. This is an example of me not preserving the volume of the hair and how much there is. So right here, this area looks way smaller of amount of hair than right here, which makes it look unrealistic. So if I were to come back and fix this, I would add more hair right here to counterbalance this twist. I would add more right there so it would look like this is all one hair rather than there magically appearing more hair down here further on in the lock. So one thing to remember is that hair can gradually get thinner as it goes down, but you don't want some areas to be suddenly less hair and then it goes back bigger, or for it to very quickly change the volume within the lock. So I do just make sure that I am keeping it consistent throughout to make sure that it looks realistic. Of course, you're going to get variation of where hair is twisted a little bit tighter or looser. So those things are just still going to come into play, but you just want it to look a little bit more cohesive as far as from the top to the bottom of those locks. And another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about volume is where the hair is coming from and where it's going, to make sure that the hair around it can accommodate what you're planning on. So specifically right here, this lock of hair right here, I know that it's starting right at her hairline. I've drawn that in and I know that that's where it's coming from. But I wanted to draw this area tucking in under these locks right here where they twist around and create this kind of half up thing. So this area right here is one lock, but when I'm drawing this area, I want to make sure that the amount of hair twisting in under it, which is this part right here, is a smaller amount than the area right up here. This is really messy, sorry about that. But I do want to make sure that this area is smaller so that it is subordinate to this area right here. Because it's going to be tucking in under there, it needs to look like this area could conceivably hide it. Honestly, this area could be a little bit thicker and maybe this a little thinner to push that a little bit more, but it is pretty close, and it is important just to remember that where the hair is going, there needs to be enough space for it to be there, or enough hair to cover it up if you can't see it anymore. Okay, the next point that I would say is work from bigger to smaller. So think shapes first, then lines. For these, when I'm thinking about hair, I like to break it down into shapes first in my head, and then figure out a plan of attack of how hierarchically it actually needs to be drawn. So for these, a quick example is I would break this down into, this is the top section, so that's one section, and in my head I actually have this under section as a little bit of its own, and then this part is a third section. So I would break this hairstyle down into 3. And I actually tend to think of the hairstyles in 3s. This is kind of a number that comes down to just from drawing it a lot. It just tends to come out that way. But this one, I have the top right here. This was a 3rd section, or the 1st section. And then the side braids were a 2nd section, and all the hair around it, that was the 3rd section. Now here, this is an example of where I would think of it in 2 sections, where I have just this part where it's wrapping back, and then the rest of her hair and how it falls. So it's very important just to start thinking about what are the shapes that will build up the hairstyle that you want to draw, and then work from that. A lot of these I will think what needs to be drawn first, and then second, and then third. So an example of this is, and pretty much all of them, is I'll usually start with the hair right at the top of the head, because that part is the most constrained to a certain shape, and then it tends to be that the hair below it falls from those shapes that I'm defining up there. So these tend to be the first and foremost ones that I get to, and then the others are subordinate to what I draw there first. So I'll start off with those. And then for this one, I drew that first, and then I drew the side braids second because they were the second most defined area. And then I went in and added all of these locks of hair to add bulk and dimension, and I would start off with these front ones first, and then I went in and added these back ones that filled in the spaces that were left by these. So it's just good to think about your plan of attack as far as the order of what you're going to draw. And I tend to work top to bottom and from away from the face. So when I'm drawing, I really focus on the first and initial lock, that section that I can draw, and then I build up around it. But I also think about the shape that it's creating and how I can make that as volumetric as possible. So let's see. So here, actually right there will be a good example where I can show that. Is I like to think of hair in a twisting motion. And it's important to remember that when you're holding a lock of hair, you can see one side of it, but there's also another side of it. And the way hair falls, it can twist around itself, and it can create this really beautiful twisted look. I mean, if you take a lock of your hair and you twist it up, you can see those lines and how they curve around it, and they give the dimension to that shape of hair because you can see where the hair is going and where it's coming from. So that is really the basis of how I draw each strand of hair, and then I just build up one strand on top of the next, on top of the next, and that's how it looks very much more complicated than it really has to be when you're thinking about it. But yeah, here's a good example of what I was going to say about that, is how I do the corkscrew is I start from the top, and if a hair is coming out from behind, so this is the way that I thought about this one, is this hair is coming behind this lock and coming out in front. Now this hair right here is an outside line. It's creating the outside contour, so I want to bring that into the inside. So I swoop that in there, and then I need to do the same with right here. I need to create that twisting where it's on this side. It needs to be on the other side of the hair so that it twists around. And I just begin filling that in and drawing hair that comes from behind and then twists around back to where it came from. So I just build that up. See, this twists up and down, and that's how I create a little bit of that curving shape. So I'll do that, and then I'll curve behind where it's curving behind this hair, and then this part is coming out from behind and around, and there we go. And I also really like to make sure that each line is actually completed. I don't like doing tapered out lines that just kind of end out there. I prefer lines that finish off, but that's just something that stylistically I prefer. You can choose to have tapered lines or show them however you like, but it is very important just to remember volumetrically how the hair is behaving and how you want to show that. And for me, I like to show that in a twisting motion. Okay, so now we're finally to the sketching part. I did speed this area up to about 3 times as fast as I normally work, just for the sake of time, and hopefully it'll be easy enough to follow still, but we can go ahead and talk about this a little bit. So this is basically the same workflow that I have for both traditional and digital works. I will have a very loose, rough sketching layer where I'm figuring out the shapes that I want to create and the different layers, and then I will get the more defined line work and the details in the second section where I actually do the line work. So this just helps me to really kind of prioritize what lines are most important and which ones are more subordinate. And right here, As I mentioned in the first part, I pretty much always start right at that point where the hairline and the part intersect, and then I work with where the bulk of the hair is flowing. And I also tend to prefer to work in a way of the sections that come closest to the viewer, and then I'll work my way backwards. So that one section where it's flowing over and going behind her ear, I want that to be forward the most. And then I want the sections that come behind that section of hair along her scalp to be secondary, because that way I can show where it's tucking behind that particular section of hair. And I work one section and then the next and then the next, farther back in space, and that just really helps me to remember where things are and to make sure that I'm doing the line work in a way that emphasizes space and that dimensionality. And this is really just me figuring out the shapes that I want for it. So because she's kind of this abstracted floating bust, I wanted the hair to interact with that and kind of push the abstraction of that as well. So I was showing it curving around, and I wanted the left side to curve up and over her shoulder, and then I want the right side to curve underneath her shoulder. And this is really where that last point that I talked about at the beginning section of this tutorial, where I do twisting line work, this really comes into play here, because that really enforces when I'm doing these like curving, twisting shapes. That is where the like individually twisted locks also come into play. So you'll see a lot right here where I will take an exterior contour line of a lock of hair, and then I will bring that into the interior line, and I will just build that around so it has this really twisting, flowing motion to it. And once I have that figured out, it's really just easy to know how to build up the next curve of that strand of hair. And it's just a really good thing to practice, because once you have it down, it flows very naturally, and then it's a lot easier to be able to sit down and just draw hair that looks very dynamic and like it's flowing, but it's actually very easy and understandable to create hair like that. And as I'm defining past the basic shape phase, I'm looking for the negative space. That is a huge part of creating dynamic, interesting hair, is looking for the areas that are not actually the hair, but the shape around it that the hair is creating. There's a few areas where I started to add in smaller sections of hair behind it, and I realized that it was obscuring that overall really interesting negative space that I had initially created. So I'll go in and erase those, and I'm just looking very thoroughly at the way that that is looking, so that I'll chip away areas, I'll make some curves much sharper so that it has that interesting look to it. I also really look for tangents, and tangents are where two different lines almost line up or exactly line up of two different objects, and then it really breaks the reality of the piece and it brings you immediately out of the believability of it. So it's important to look for tangents, and when you have tangents, you want to either overlap them more or create a bigger gap. And when I was first doing this, the area where the left side of her hair comes down from her scalp, it had a little bit of a tangent with that final curve of her hair where it was flowing over her shoulder. So I overlapped it even more so that it had that dimension to it again, and it looked like one was coming forward rather than flattening it out with that tangent. And with the line work, like I mentioned, this is where I start getting the detailing in. I'll go in with thicker line work for the exterior lines of each lock of hair, I'll call them. So that's the larger section, the grouping of the hair. So this front bang area where it tucks around behind her ear and then back behind her head, you can see that that line work around that specific section is a lot thicker than the interior line work. And I tend to do line work where it's showing a little bit of a gap. So where the line work underneath comes out in a different direction slightly, that implies that there's different hair coming from below rather than it all flowing from the same source. It's coming and peeking out at a different direction. So I will thicken that line up as well to show that there's a little bit of a shadow, like there's a disconnect of where that hair is coming from. So just to reiterate, I do thicker lines around the outside dimensions of the smaller sections of hair, and then I do thicker lines around where there would be a natural shadow or where there is a break in where the hair would be, like there would be a little bit of a space. And that just really helps so that it doesn't become this mass of lots and lots of similar size and similar looking strands of hair line work that ends up just really blending in. So paying attention to the line weight and where to make things thicker will really help make this look very detailed but still have order to it. So again, just to talk about the order of how I do it, because I think that that's really important to comprehending how to draw hair in a very detailed way without getting lost in all of the details and all of the line work. But it is very important to keep an order of how you work. So I get the base shapes done in the sketch, and then when I'm doing the line work, I will work from near the face away to the face, and then from the top of the head downward. And when I am actually doing the more defined lines in the line work, I will do each strand of hair, each section to completion, and then I will do the next strand of hair that's behind it. And that just really helps me to keep grounded as far as what areas in each strand of hair needs to be thicker line work so that it really pushes that importance of the line, and then which areas need to be much thinner lines. So again, the thinner lines are just really small details, and the thicker lines are the ones that are the contours or where there's overlapping shapes. And the very final step that I take when I'm doing line work for hair, whether it's traditional or digital, is I will go in and look for areas where I can thicken up the line work. So like I mentioned, where things are overlapping, where there would naturally be a shadow cast, I will add an extra thick line there and around some of the edges. And this is just kind of that final little detail that helps push some of the shape so that it looks a little bit clearer in the final form when you're looking at the full piece. And that is pretty much it for today's hair tutorial. I tried to be as comprehensive as possible and put as much information as I could. So if you have any questions or clarifications that you need, let me know down in the comments. And like I mentioned, I will be doing some smaller hair tutorials that are focused on hairstyles. So if you have any requests for the hairstyles you'd like to see next, let me know. I think that those tutorials I'll be able to slow it down a lot more so it can be a little bit more simplified and clear as far as what exactly I'm doing. I will do a men's hair tutorial hopefully soon as well. But yeah, that's pretty much it for today, like I said. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be on Saturday.